All right, so we just took an extremely tiny glimpse into the rabbit hole of spirituality. I know those videos must have seemed really long, but I promise we barely scraped the top of the iceberg. But now that we slightly understand how our inner world works and how our outer world functions with the 7 universal principles, it's now time to connect our inner world and our outer world together, taking full control, aligning our actions, emotions, beliefs, and identity together towards our goal for massive success. We're going to be accomplishing all of this through one little chemical in our brain, and that is dopamine. So what is dopamine? You've probably heard about it before, but don't really understand the full extent of it. Dopamine is essentially a navigational chemical in our brain. Dopamine is designed with one single purpose in mind, to help you navigate and take certain actions and go towards certain directions in life. Dopamine essentially programs your subconscious mind and primes it towards what actions you should take. It does this through rewarding certain actions with large spikes of dopamine, and the feeling of dopamine and hitting a large spike of dopamine is essentially feeling a large sense of pleasure and fulfillment. This process is essential to nature in ensuring that the action of an individual aligns with the best actions to take for the further evolution of the species. Here is an example. A fox is hungry, so it searches for food. After hours of hunting, it kills a rabbit. As it's eating the rabbit, the brain rewards it with a huge spike of dopamine. Another example, there's a male fox attracted to a female fox. They mate, and their brain rewards both of them with large spikes of dopamine. The reason I brought that up is because food and sex are the primary example of a natural dopamine release. The brain releases this chemical as it realizes that this action further evolves the species as a whole. Through rewarding the animal with this large dopamine spike, the subconscious realizes that if it keeps doing these actions, it will keep getting those dopamine spikes. Since animals obviously have lower levels of consciousness than us, it's very important that dopamine can be released to help them navigate which decisions to take throughout life. But the most important part is it's getting the animal to repeatedly take these actions. Usually any task that rewards a large amount of dopamine is a pretty challenging and hard task to achieve or accomplish. That is why the brain provides this huge spike of dopamine. It essentially acts as a motivation for the animal to do hard tasks, knowing that it's going to get that dopamine spike at the end. The brain provides this dopamine spike is basically a huge chemical form of motivation that ultimately allows the animal to accomplish impossible tasks. It will go through physical pain, hunt for hours, and do anything it takes to get that dopamine hit. Ultimately, tasks that it probably wouldn't do if it wasn't subconsciously programmed to understand that the dopamine reward will be at the end. And since humans are glorified animals, we have the same process ingrained in us. And honestly, we would not have the reality we know today if nature didn't somehow create this process. Over the years, as humanity started to evolve, scientists started understanding dopamine and really doing research on how this process works. Scientists began hooking up devices to rats' brains that would stimulate their dopamine receptor if they took a specific action. Essentially, they created a little button, and anytime the rat would go over and push it, it would get a huge spike of dopamine. To their surprise, the rat became completely obsessed with hitting that button. It would ignore its food, it wouldn't drink water, it would go through electrical currents, it would walk over painful objects just to hit the dopamine button. There was almost nothing they could do to stop this rat from running towards the button and hitting it. And of course, through the years, corporations got their hands on this information and began creating products and services geared solely towards stimulating our dopamine receptors, and over the years, eventually being able to create nearly perfect dopamine releasing systems. TikTok is probably the best example of this. Truthfully, the algorithm that runs TikTok will go down in human history as the most powerful and effective dopamine releasing system humanity has created so far. Essentially, every business you can name utilizes this information to get you coming back to their products and services over and over and over again. Just like the rat, sacrificing your future success, your money, your time, your freedom, sacrificing relationships, and basically anything just to get your hit of dopamine. With porn, fast food, drugs, video games, social media, movies, TV shows, the list basically goes on forever. You see, dopamine was designed to be released after accomplishing a huge, challenging task, like hunting or finding a mate. Now you can simply get huge dopamine spikes by reaching in your pocket and grabbing your phone. This is ultimately what allowed our species to evolve into a fat, lazy, confused, unsatisfied mess we're in today. And essentially, we're programmed into this kind of dopamine slavery at a very young age, basically through our unconscious parents who string us along into all these unhealthy behaviors that are basically just social norms at this point. Think of what you would do as a child before going to school. You'd probably eat your sugary, horrible breakfast of like Eggo waffles or cereal, and you're probably watching cartoons the same time you were eating that breakfast. From a young age, our dopamine receptors are rewarded for behaviors that take zero effort. As this kid is eating his sugary filled breakfast, he's getting hit with a huge spike of dopamine. That's because sugar is hard to find in nature. So when an animal would find it, they would get hit with a huge spike of dopamine. But nowadays, all you have to do is go downstairs, open up some plastic packaging, and get hit with the same amount of dopamine that an animal would get hit with after days of hunting. Plus, meanwhile, this kid's watching cartoons as he eats the sugary food. Meanwhile, while the cartoon is programming him with whatever agenda the media company's throwing at him. But also when you're watching shows, you kind of subconsciously view yourself as the character. So if the character accomplishes something, you get dopamine releases as well. Ultimately, you get the point. It's pretty easy to see that in our modern world, we're almost doomed to live a life of dopamine slavery, trained to succumb to our lowest virtues and values in order to get our dopamine hit. As we grow older, it turns into drug use, porn addiction, and we slowly progress into worse and worse behaviors, searching for the easiest path to dopamine. The more you do these instant gratification-based actions, the less dopamine is rewarded each time, which essentially forces us to walk down this breadcrumb path to hell. And being woken up to information like this is not too fun. It has a pretty dark nature, realizing that our entire society is built off systems like this. To realize that systems like this were consciously created by others, realizing that the true people in power in this world want mindless slaves who are distracted by their own primal urges, who are too dumb to question anything, and ultimately just people who accept reality and will work to just simply survive. But with all that being said, essentially no one is to blame for your reality but yourself. Greed will always take over people, companies will always optimize for the most profit, and governments will always want mindless citizens, or it creates too much of a problem for them to manage everyone. At the end of the day, you own your own inner world. No one can take that from you. No company, no system, no government, or any amount of dopamine can take over your inner world and sway you to take actions you don't want to take, unless you allow your actions, emotions, beliefs, and identity fall into resonation with statements like, I'm addicted to X, I'm not an overachiever, I don't have what it takes, I'm depressed, I've always been like this, I can't change. You see, ultimately, words are spells that create your own reality. The thoughts you think and the words you speak quite literally cast spells around you. Why do you think it's called spelling? Ultimately, this is why I've gone so deep with explaining your inner world, so I could present you with this idea today and we could ultimately come to this conclusion together. You are the one that's in control of your life. You're simply not limited by anything. Some of you might believe you're depressed. Maybe you've even been diagnosed. Maybe you take medications. Maybe someone told you you have a chemical imbalance in your brain and you're doomed to live a life of depression, that all you can do is take mind-numbing medications to hopefully manage it for the rest of your life. And maybe you agreed. Maybe you allowed that information to resonate with you. Maybe you allowed that statement to creep into your identity. Maybe it took hold of your belief system. Maybe it took power over your emotions and started affecting your daily actions. You see, the most powerful way to control someone is through changing their identity. Can you see how just accepting one identity statement ends up with you being fully controlled by it? If you align your identity with something and your beliefs fall in line with that identity, then your emotions are governed by it, and then ultimately changing your daily actions, completely boxing you into the reality of whatever identity statement you resonated with. If you don't want to feel depressed, you simply cannot identify yourself as someone with depression. I think ultimately a lot of people in our society have allowed themselves to resonate with statements that limit themselves, that give out the control that they naturally have as an individual. I think a lot of people in our society have also fallen victim to millions of different sources of dopamine, becoming completely addicted to them, and pushing that dopamine button has become their only sense of fulfillment in life, accomplishing nothing, searching for the easy way out, hoping to become rich with minimal effort, subconsciously thinking that true fulfillment can come as easy as all their addictive forms of instant gratification. Everyone is used to receiving fulfillment in a blink of an eye. Everyone has such a low expectation of what it takes to feel real fulfillment and success in life. Let's think about video games. Through a couple minutes or hours of hard work on a video game, you can level up your character, get access to new weapons, rank up, and make tons of money inside the game, reaching all sorts of levels of fulfillment through easy to reach dopamine releases that the game developers consciously designed to keep you addicted to their game. The game of life doesn't have these little breadcrumb paths to dopamine that easily allow you to feel dopamine and senses of fulfillment without conscious mental activity. In life, you can put months or years of work into something without a single milligram of dopamine being released, having almost nothing to show for your successes. Life is on a scale 1,000 times larger than these